He was known as the Quiet One, a guard who walked with perfectly measured steps, never raised his voice, never laughed, never revealed anything behind the rigid mask carved into his face. His name was Victor Schneider, and to everyone around him he was the model of unquestioning obedienza man who blended into the machinery of power so seamlessly that no one ever looked twice at him. But history rarely reveals its miracles in plain sight. Before the war, Victor had been a school teacher in a small Bavarian town, a man known for gentle discipline and an unwavering belief that children deserved protection above all else. He lived a quiet life, married young, and dreamed of writing books for students one day. But war has a brutal way of rearranging people's fates, pulling them into roles they never imagined. His conscription came swiftly. His assignment came without negotiation, and the uniform they handed him felt like a verdict he could not escape. The moment he stepped through the gates of the camp for the first time, Victor understood that his life would be split into two timelines, the one he lived before and the one he would survive after. He walked the grounds with perfectly rehearsed indifference, aware that a single misplaced expression could mark him as a traitor. The other guards viewed him as dull, forgettable qualities that, ironically, kept him alive. But beneath that careful mask, something fierce and fragile remained intact. A belief that a person's humanity could not be erased, no matter how violently others tried. He learned to observe without being observed. He memorized schedules, rotations, blind spots in the perimeter. He noticed which officers were drunk on power and which were simply drunk. He learned which prisoners were connected to underground networks, which ones carried messages hidden under their clothing, which ones had nothing left to lose. And then he began quietly, cautiously, to intervene. At first, it was small, a pause in his patrol that allowed a smuggled piece of bread to pass from one hand to another, a deliberately miscounted roster that spared a sick man from being noticed, a warning whistle, faint and casual, that nudged people out of sight moments before an inspection. These tiny acts were invisible to the system but life-saving to those who recognized the patterns. The prisoners began calling him Der Schatten *, the shadow, because he appeared only when danger was closing in, and vanished the moment safety returned. Metal doors that were supposed to be locked were mysteriously left ajar. Confiscated items reappeared beneath mattresses as if slipped there by ghosts. Transfers that would have separated families were quietly but every act of mercy came with a cost. Each step he took on that frozen ground felt like walking on thin ice stretched across a bottomless lake. He lived with constant dread that someone would notice his hesitation, that another guard would catch the flicker of compassion in his eyes, that an officer would question why he lingered too long in certain corridors. One night, during an unexpected inspection, Victor witnessed a group of prisoners huddled around a frail teenager who could barely stand. The officers barked orders, demanding the boy be dragged forward. Victor stepped between them, expression blank, voice steady. "He is already assigned to labor detail tomorrow," he said, forging the lie with calm precision. "His condition is noted. If he collapses, the responsibility will fall on the officer who disregarded medical orders." The officer hesitated. No one wanted to be blamed for inefficiency. The boy lived another day. As Victor continued his quiet sabotage, he began to understand something that terrified him more than the uniform he wore. The other guards were not all oblivious. Some noticed the patterns. Some suspected, some whispered. Yet no one confronted him, because in a system built on fear, suspicion is rarely enough. Proof is everything. And Victor was careful, painfully careful, never to give them any. Still, the pressure grew like an unspoken storm. His hands shook at night, his heart raced whenever footsteps echoed behind him. He learned to breathe silently, to think 2 steps ahead, to bury every instinct, except survival. But then something changed, something that shifted Victor from a man who saved quietly to a man who risked everything. A new transport arrived one icy morning, and among the exhausted line of prisoners was a woman with a familiar look, someone he had known from his schoolteacher days. Her name was Elise Berger, once a fellow teacher, once full of life and conviction. Now her eyes held nothing but exhaustion. Their gazes met for less than a second. That second sealed Victor's fate. She recognized him, and in her recognition, Something passed between them, a silent play, a memory of the world before uniform and command, a reminder that he had not always belonged to cruelty. That night, Victor made a decision that would change the course of his hidden rebellion. He would not simply protect individuals anymore. He would attempt something larger, something that could cost him everything if it failed. But he knew that his mask could not hold forever, and somewhere deep inside, he felt the first fracture spreading. Victor lay awake long after lights out, staring at the dark ceiling of his quarters, while distant shouts and barking dogs punctured the night. Elise's face would not leave his mind. Once, they had argued in staff rooms about teaching methods, about ethics, about responsibility. She had been the kind of teacher who stayed after class with struggling children, who slipped bread into the pockets of those she suspected were going hungry at home. Now she was here, under his watch, under his uniform. In the morning, he checked the labor lists with hands that trembled only on the inside. Elise's name had been assigned to a work detail notorious for brutality. It was the kind of assignment that turned days into a countdown. He stood still, the paper blurring for a moment. Then, in a motion so small it could have been a simple correction, he drew a line through her name and rewrote it in another column: kitchen duty. It was a calculated move. The kitchen was one of the few places where scraps of food could be diverted, where warmth existed, where a person might last a little longer. It was also more visible, more controlled. If someone noticed the change, he would need an explanation ready. He rehearsed one in his head even as he walked away. That afternoon, he positioned himself near the path where prisoners shuffled between blocks. The cold wind cut through cloth and bone alike. As Elise's line passed, he stepped closer. Expression flat. "Number 34,219, he called, using the digits instead of her name. She flinched, then stepped forward, eyes lowered. "You are reassigned," he said in clipped tones. "Report to kitchen detail tomorrow at dawn." His voice, to anyone listening, was indifferent. His posture, correct. But his eyes flicked up just enough to meet hers not. Long enough to draw suspicion, just long enough to send a message. Asterisk. "I see. I remember." Asterisk. For an instant, he saw recognition flare in her gaze. Not gratitude, not relief. Something else. Cautious calculation. She understood the danger of being remembered by a guard. The next morning, he observed from a distance as she moved into the kitchen line. No protest was raised. No officer questioned the reassignment. Paper, in that place, was both sacred and chaotic. Once a list was stamped, few bothered to ask who had written what. Days turned into weeks. Elise adapted quickly, using the kitchen not just to survive, but to become a quiet hub. Extra potato peels, hardened crusts, thin soups, these started to move in patterns Victor recognized. She never looked at him directly, but he saw her slipping food into the hands of those who were fading, those who were too weak to stand in line for rations. She had not lost herself, even here. For the first time since his conscription, Victor felt something like alignment. He was no longer the only one playing a dangerous game. One evening, during a rare moment of overlap near the storage shed, Elise spoke without turning her head. "I know what you're doing," she murmured, "watching the snow, and I know what it would cost you if they found out." He remained still, eyes straight ahead. "You don't know anything," he replied softly. "For any listening shadows." She almost smiled, almost. "You always were a poor liar." Schneider, her use of his name sent a shock through him. If anyone heard, but the yard was mostly empty, the other guards distracted by a dispute near the gate. Still, her boldness made his pulse spike. "Be careful what you say," he warned quietly. "Words can kill faster than bullets here." Elise's gaze stayed on the horizon. "Words have always had that power," she said. "We just refused to believe it, until men with uniforms proved it to us." He wanted to ask 100 questions, to apologize for the uniform on his body, to explain how choice had been squeezed out of his life until all that remained was this mask. But there was no room for confession in that place. Only action. Days later, rumors began to circulate of an inspection from higher authorities, men who came not to observe, but to judge loyalty. The kind whose presence made even the cruelest officers stand a little straighter. The camp buzzed with a different fear. When inspectors arrived, someone always paid the price for appearing weak, soft, or inefficient. For Vic, it meant one thing. He needed to erase every trace of his quiet rebellion. For the prisoners, it meant something worse. He knew the pattern: increased roll calls, harsher punishments, sudden selections to demonstrate control. The very people he had tried to shield could become examples for others. That night, he studied the rosters again, eyes flying over names he had learned to associate with smuggled notes, underground contacts, whispered plans. If inspectors decided to demand a display of strength, the officers would choose from these lists. He made a choice. In the early hours before dawn, he went through the duty records, altering them with deliberate care. Those who were most vulnerable, those who were key to whatever fragile resistance existed, he reassigned on paper to less visible tasks. Others, those already resigned to their fate, remained on the front lines. It was a grim calculation, one that would haunt him, but the only one that might save more lives overall. The inspectors arrived under a cold, unforgiving sky. They moved through the camp with clipped precision, their presence like a shadow spreading across every yard and barrack. They asked questions, examined logs, scrutinized guards. One of them stopped in front of Victor. "You," the inspector said, eyes narrow. "You've been here how long?" "2 years," Victor replied, voice flat, posture perfect. "And in those 2 years, you've never requested a transfer?" the man asked, searching his face for signs of hesitation, of doubt. "No, sir," Victor answered. "I serve where I'm assigned." The inspector's gaze lingered, as if trying to see through him. For a terrifying second, Victor wondered if the man sensed the cracks beneath the surface. Then, slowly, the inspector nodded. "We need men who don't ask questions," he said. "Men who do what must be done." He moved on. Victor's lungs burned as he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That evening, news spread quietly. The inspection was over. No mass punishments, no sudden disappearances of officers, but a handful of prisoners, those whose names had remained on the original duty lists, were gone. Victor knew exactly which names they were. He had left them there. The weight of that choice settled on him like wet concrete. Later, as he walked his route near the kitchen, Elise crossed his path, carrying a crate. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in her gaze he saw Etha. Understanding, the calculation, the silent question. Asterisk, how many did you save? And how many did you decide not to? Asterisk, he had no answer he could bear to say out loud. That night, sitting alone in his quarters, he realized something with brutal clarity. He was not just fighting those above him. He was fighting the version of himself they wanted him to become. And the longer he wore the uniform, the harder it became to know where the mask ended and the man underneath began. The winter that followed was the kind that froze sound itself. Smoke rose and thin, choked lines from the chimneys, and the air felt heavy with things that could not be spoken. Victor moved through it like a man walking inside a glass shell, aware of everything, touching nothing directly, terrified of leaving fingerprints. The dual life was eating him from the inside. By day, he was a loyal guard. He barked orders when watched, walked his routes with mechanical precision, and signed documents with the unthinking efficiency expected of him. By night, he replayed every decision he had made, every name he had altered, every life he had failed to protect. The dead were not faceless to him. They stood in the corners of his room, silent, waiting. It was Elise who broke the stalemate. One evening, during a rare moment when the kitchen corridor stood empty, she leaned closer as she passed him, her voice barely louder than her breath. "There is talk," she murmured. "People are being moved again, not just to other labor sites." Victor knew what that meant. Transfers that didn't return. Trains whose destinations erased the need for records. "How many?" he asked, his jaw tight. "A list is coming," she said. "No one knows who is on it yet, but some are sure they will not survive another relocation. They are asking, is there any way to disappear on paper?" The question hung between them like a wire. To disappear on paper in a system built on documentation was to rewrite reality itself. It was dangerous, nearly impossible, and exactly the kind of risk he had been edging toward without admitting it. Adjusting duty rosters was one thing. Erasing people from official transfers was something else entirely. "Names," he said at last, his voice low. "Bring me names. Only those who understand what it means. No guarantees, no promises, just a chance." That night, a folded scrap of cloth appeared beneath a crate near the storage shed where he sometimes paused. Inside, stitched with trembling hands, were numbers, prisoner IDs of those Elise had chosen. People from different blocks. A quiet seamstress, a boy who carried messages, a man who had once been a doctor. Not random, not convenient. Important. Victor studied the list long after lights out. Each number a weight on his chest. He knew that changing them would create discrepancies. Discrepancies led to questions. Questions led to suspicion. Suspicion, in a place like this, led to graves. But the alternative was simpler and more brutal. Watch them board a train he knew they would never leave. He chose complexity. The transfer list arrived 3 days later. Rows of numbers, destinations, signatures of officers who would never be held accountable. Victor waited until the record room was empty, then stepped inside and closed the door behind him, the sound of the latch echoing louder than it should have. His hands did not shake now. If they did, his handwriting would betray him. He found the names from Elise's cloth in the transfer schedule. Each one had a destination line stamped beside it. Slowly, carefully, he drew a single, precise line through those entries and copied them into a different column. Internal reassignment, with a notation that they were to remain in their current block due to undefined logistical reasons. He mimicked the handwriting style of another clerk he had studied for months. He used the exact ink weight. He practiced the signature twice on a scrap of paper before placing it at the bottom. Then he did something he had never dared to do before. He removed the original sheet entirely and replaced it with the altered version, making it the new original. When he stepped back, his heart pounded in his ears. This was no longer a small adjustment. This was an official lie inserted into the bloodstream of the system. If anyone compared versions, he would be finished. He walked out of the record room with a neutral expression and the feeling that some invisible line had been crossed. The morning of the transfer came with the usual chaos: barking dogs, shouted numbers, hurried formations. Victor watched closely as prisoners were lined up for the train. He scanned faces, counting silently. None of Elise. His names were there. Instead, those numbers appeared on duty rosters, reassigned to work details inside the camp. It was not safety nets, truly, but it was time. Time they were not meant to have. Elise passed him later that day, carrying a bucket. Their eyes met. No smile, no nod, just a flicker like a candle flame fighting the wind. She knew, he knew, she knew. And for a brief moment, the weight of what he had done felt bearable. But the camp had its own ways of finding fractures. A few weeks later, an officer stopped Victor outside the administrative hut. "Schneider," he said, flipping through a folder with a frown. "There is confusion with last month's transfer. Some of the numbers on the follow-up reports don't match body counts. Have you noticed anything irregular?" Victor felt the world narrow. He met the officer's gaze with practiced boredom. "Only that orders change faster than paper," he said. "If logistics sent updates directly to Berlin and skipped us, the errors will be theirs, not ours." The officer snorted, annoyed but satisfied to have someone else to blame in his imagination. Humph. Paperwork. Always a mess. He tossed the folder aside. Victor walked away, each step deliberate, his pulse roaring. That had been close to close. The system had almost turned its head in his direction. That night, he considered stopping. He considered retreating back into pure survival, becoming the kind of guard history would barely remember a nameless cog. It would be easier. It would be safer. But safety, he realized, was not neutral in a place like this. Safety was an agreement with the machinery. The next time Elise found a way to speak to him, her voice carried something new. Urgency. "They are planning another inspection," she said, "and this time, They are watching the guards, not just us. Someone has been whispering that there is a soft man among the staff. He stiffened. Soft men don't last here. That is exactly the problem, she replied. There was a pause, filled only by the distant clank of metal. Then she added, "They might test you." He knew what that meant before she explained it. A staged scenario, a moment where he would be expected to act with brutality to prove his loyalty in front of others, a performance of cruelty. If he refused, he would die. If A complete something inside him would die instead. For the first time since his conscription, Victor felt truly trapped not by fences or orders, but by the collision of who he had been and what he was being forced to become. The quiet rebellion he had nurtured for months had led him here to a point where no choice would be clean. He did not sleep that night. He stood by the small window of his quarters, watching snow fall under the weak moonlight, and wondered if there would ever be a version of this story which he survived with both his life and his conscience intact. Deep down, he already knew the answer. The only question left was, if he had to lose one, which would he choose? Spring arrived in uneven fragments, as if the world outside had forgotten how to change seasons. Snow melted in hesitant patches, revealing frozen soil that still carried the memory of winter. Inside the camp, however, nothing thawed. The routines remained rigid, the fear constant, the atmosphere brittle. Victor felt the shifting tension long before anyone said it aloud. The regime was weakening. The cracks were invisible to most, but not to him. Orders took longer to arrive. New officers came with uncertainty behind their eyes. Supply wagons appeared less frequently, guarded by men who looked older than their uniforms. But uncertainty did not bring relief. It brought danger. The more unstable the system became, the more violently certain officers tried to reassert control. A cornered ideology was far more unpredictable than a confident one. Rumors spread, some hopeful, some terrifying. Some said liberation was close. Others said the camp leadership was preparing to erase evidence. No one knew which whispers to trust. Victor worked quietly through the shifting chaos, adjusting files with increasingly delicate precision. Every false notation felt like walking across thin ice. Every reassigned name felt like a stolen breath of life. But the system was fraying, and frayed systems noticed irregularities. One afternoon, a senior officer stopped him outside the administrative barrack. "Schneider," the man said, squinting at him as if studying a painting with a flaw he couldn't quite locate. "You handle paperwork often?" "Yes, sir. It's part of my assigned duties." "HM." The officer tapped a folder in his hand. "Paperwork is sensitive. Mistakes travel. They leave trails. Trails lead to questions, and questions lead to trouble. For everyone." Victor kept his expression blank, but his pulse tightened. "I understand, sir." "I hope you do," the officer said. "Some guards have been acting inconsistently. Loyalty is not just a matter of orders, it is a matter of clarity." His eyes narrowed. "Be clear, Schneider." The encounter lingered with Victor long after the man walked away. It wasn't an accusation. Not yet. But it was something worse. Suspicion with no shape. Suspicion hunts freely. That night, Victor walked to the small window of his sleeping quarters. The sky outside was moonless, an unbroken dark. He wondered if Elise sensed the danger rising. She had become even more careful, speaking only in fragments, hiding meaning between routine motions. She delivered messages the way someone might carry water in cupped hands, never enough to drown in, but enough to survive. The next week, a sudden inspection swept through the camp. Officers moved with clipped urgency, opening drawers, questioning guards, comparing rosters. Victor kept to his assigned tasks, heart pounding beneath a mask of calm. Twice, he saw officers flipping through transfer documents he had altered. Each time he forced himself to breathe, to appear bored rather than terrified. But luck is a fragile shield. Late one afternoon, Elise found him behind the storage shed, her face pale under layers of exhaustion. "They are looking for inconsistencies," she whispered. Several prisoners from Block 12 were questioned about previous assignments. Block 12 contained many of the people Victor had quietly protected. "What did they say?" Ask it." They said nothing. But silence is its own kind of answer. She paused. They believe the records have been changed. They do not know by whom. Yet, the air felt thinner suddenly, as if the camp itself were holding its breath. "Victor," she said, dropping formalities for the first time, "you may need to stop, for your sake." He shook his head. "Stopping now changes nothing. It only means the last risk I took was for no reason." She looked at him with an expression he had seen only in brief glimpses, a mixture of fear and respect. "If they suspect you, they will not confront you directly. They will observe. They will wait for one misstep." He knew she was right. The danger had shifted from hypothetical to tangible. He felt it in the way certain guards looked at him a fraction longer, in the tightened posture of officers scanning documents, in the subtle but growing silence around his presence. A system like this one did not strike immediately when threatened. It tightened slowly, invisibly, like a trap disguised as routine. Days passed under a new kind of tension, one that seeped into every room and every decision. Victor kept his movements controlled, his face unreadable, but beneath the surface his mind raced through possibilities: what he could erase, what he could hide, what he could no longer undo. The breaking point came when he discovered that one of the altered rosters had been pulled for review. A small notation marked the margin: asterisk, verify origin. Two words that could unravel everything. He felt something in him harden not courage, not defiance, but a quiet understanding that his path had reached its edge. He could not retreat. He could not undo the changes. He could only go forward, however narrow the road. That night, he burned every scrap of evidence. He still kept the bits of cloth, copied numbers, old notes from Elise. Flames licked upward, turning hopes and risks into ash. The fire reflected in his eyes, but it brought no warmth. The next morning, he learned that the prisoner he had been forced to strike during the loyalty test had been reassigned again. Some said it was coincidence. Others whispered it was punishment. Victor felt the weight of it. Another reminder that every choice he made carried consequences far beyond himself. The camp leadership was becoming unpredictable. Guards disappeared from shifts with no explanation. Some were transferred. Others simply never returned. Victor felt the circle tightening, but he did not know yet whether it was closing around him or around the entire collapsing structure. All he knew was that time was running out for the prisoners, for Elise, and for him. And the worst truth of all, in a system built to destroy, even resistance carried a cost he had not yet fully paid. The final weeks of the war came not with triumph, but with a strange, creeping silence. Rumors that once seemed impossible now spread like sparks carried by the wind. The front collapsing, cities surrendering, officers fleeing their posts. The camp leadership grew restless, snapping orders that contradicted each other, walking with the hollow-eyed desperation of men who sensed their world fading. Even the prisoners felt the shift, not hope exactly, but a loosening of the iron certainty that had ruled every moment of their lives. Victor noticed it most in the paperwork. Requests stopped arriving altogether. Transfer schedules halted mid. Entire departments seemed to simply stop functioning. The machinery of oppression, once terrifyingly efficient, was now sputtering. And sputtering machines can become lethal. Then came the day when the gates did not open at their usual time. The guards reported late, scattered, disorganized. Some had abandoned their posts during the night. Others stayed but carried the look of men trapped inside the consequences of their own choices. A senior officer ordered all records to be burned immediately. Another countered, insisting that everything must be preserved for a last-minute inspection. Confusion spiraled into arguments. Victor understood what this meant. In chaos, cruelty could erupt without warning. He moved through the morning with deliberate calm, taking mental stock of where Elise had been assigned, who was still in the infirmary, which buildings might be overlooked in the chaos. Every instinct he had sharpened over the months told him the camp was entering its most dangerous moment. Not because the system was strong, but because it was dying. The liberation itself came without ceremony. A distant rumble echoed through the air vehicles, unfamiliar engines. Growing louder, guards ran to vantage points, some shooting, some simply dropping their weapons and fleeing toward the forest. Prisoners huddled in their blocks, too afraid to move, too conditioned to trust nothing. Then the gates fell open, not by command, but by collapse, and soldiers from the outside world entered. They moved carefully, horrified by what they found. Orders were shouted, medical teams rushed forward, the air filled with confusion and disbelief. It was over, but the ending of a system does not end its consequences. Victor stood among the guards who were rounded up and separated. Some shouted protests, others claimed ignorance. A few broke down entirely, confessing everything and nothing at once. Victor did neither. He stood silent, hands behind his head, eyes lowered. He felt the eyes of former prisoners, on him some filled with fury, some with numbness, some with a depth of grief he could not bear to meet. He searched the crowd for Elise, but did not see her. For a terrible moment he believed she might have been transferred, or punished, or swallowed by the chaos. Then, as he was escorted toward the perimeter, he saw a movement near the medical tents. Elise alive, though thinner, steadier, her face carrying the quiet shock of someone confronting freedom as if it were a foreign landscape. She did not approach him. She did not need to. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment Victor felt the full weight of what he had done and what he had failed to do. There was no absolution in her gaze, but there was no hatred either. She looked at him the way history looks at complicated men, with acknowledgement, not forgiveness. The trials began months later. Victor was questioned extensively. Records were examined, cross-referenced, reconstructed. Some of his altered documents survived, others had burned. Several prisoners testified not to defend him, but to speak truthfully. Some recalled small mercies. Others recalled the day he had been forced to raise his hand against one of their own. None lied for him. None exaggerated blame. In the end, the courts concluded what Victor himself had known. He had participated in a system built on cruelty, even as he tried, in small hidden ways, to resist it. Intent mattered, but so did action. He had saved lives, and he had also enforced rules that harmed others. He was neither monster nor hero, merely a man who tried to navigate a world designed to break everyone inside it. He received a prison sentence. Not the harshest, not the lightest, a judgment that reflected both his guilt and the lives he had quietly helped preserve. When he was released years later, the world had already begun writing its accounts of what had happened. Museums were being built. Testimonies were being recorded. The survivors carried memories that time could not erase. Victor found work under a different name, living quietly, never pretending he had been innocent, never speaking of his past unless asked under serious purpose. One winter morning, long after the war, he received a letter unsigned, the handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a single sentence. Some lived because someone refused to stop trying. Below, the line was a small scrap of a cloth patterned similar to the one Elise had once used to smuggle numbers. Not the same piece, but a reminder. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer he rarely opened. There was no redemption in it. Only memory. And memory mattered. As he grew older, Victor often walked to a nearby memorial site, watching visitors read plaques and names. He knew he did not belong among the honored, nor entirely among the condemned. He belonged in the complicated middle one of the many whose humanity had been tested in ways the world could scarcely comprehend. Elise survived, built a life, told her story when she was ready. She never spoke his name publicly, not out of malice, but out of clarity. Her survival was not his story. It belonged to her, and those who endured beside her. Victor died quietly in a small apartment overlooking a river. No headline marked his passing, but among his papers, someone later found a list of names those he had tried to protect written neatly, carefully, as if he had rewritten them again and again to keep them from disappearing. He had spent the rest of his life trying to learn one truth. A man cannot erase what he has done, but he can choose who he becomes after facing it. History would never call him a hero, but it would not forget him either.